Welcome to ABA On Call. Join myself, Rick Kubina. We have so many studies that show if you have a behavior that's followed by a consequence, let's say it's positive, there's an increased likelihood that that's going to happen in the future. And Doug Kostewicz.
We behave differently because it was determined for us. It's not determined for all.
For thought-provoking conversation. Hey everybody, would you like to get a CEU for this episode? Listen closely for the announcement of 3 secret words delivered throughout the episode. Take note of those words and we will tell you where to go to get your CEU when the show is over. Hello everyone and welcome to ABA On Call. And today we are rejoined, it's a triumphant return by my excellent co-host, Dr. Doug Kostewicz. Welcome back, Doug.
It has been, I wish it was fun, but it wasn't fun. But I see that you held things down and we're going very well. So we're hoping that I don't mess up the momentum and we can keep on keeping on.
All right. Well, this is going to be, all of our topics are always fun. This one,
definitely,
I think it has a place near and dear to our heart, and that is us talking about skepticism in ABA. And let's start off with talking about skepticism. There's a lot of words we could throw out there. There's skepticism, which is essentially people questioning the truthfulness, the veracity of claims that lack empirical evidence. Now, there's skeptical thinking, there's critical reasoning, there's skeptical thinking, there's all of these terms out there, but we're just talking today about being a skeptic and what that means.
Right, and I think even closer, we're housing it within sort of the continuum between what is science, and then you've got on the other end of the continuum, which is non-science. But in the middle there's the things that aren't quite both and could be called a pseudoscience. So it's using, understanding what this type of reasoning is and then figuring out what we do.
Yeah. Although there's what are the things that are quite both, but then there's pseudoscience. So that middle ground is something that might be moving towards a science or to a pseudoscience.
Right. And that's the hard part. And that's why this is so important, a skill test.
Yeah, I think it's so important for people in our field because you often hear this, well, that person is really smart or that person knows science. You can be smart, you can be scientific, but yet that doesn't mean you're a skeptical thinker and that you're applying and you're looking at things skeptically.
Well, take that to the other side. Things can kind of make sense to you, and it's just, wow, that's just logical, when that actually is not probably the best way to do that, because whoever's providing that logic perhaps isn't using enough skepticism.
Yeah. Well, let's we're going to talk a lot about how you apply skeptical thinking.
Mm-hmm.
But let's just talk about how would someone in ABA benefit from skeptical thinking? We work oftentimes with people with disabilities or learning differences. Should we just say, well, you really don't need skeptical thinking, you just need to trust the science?
Well, I guess a better question is it potentially dangerous to someone to not be skeptical? Are there dangerous side effects, Rick?
Yes. The one, let me answer. We keep answering our questions with questions.
Right.
I'll answer your question with why do we need it, and then we can apply. We can answer those questions that you said. So there's 4 reasons. And by the way, I'd point out that this is a class that I've taught. Doug, I know you have had seminars where you've also taught this. So this is something that we've spent a lot of time thinking about. And there's 4 reasons why people should be skeptical. Number 1, you can be swindled out of money. Number 2, you can be taken advantage of. Number 3, you can make bad life decisions. And number 4, the worst one, you can die. So could that happen in the treatment of people with disabilities? Or even, again, we don't need to, although we're talking about disabilities in ABA, it could be anybody in anywhere. In terms of autism, there are so many treatments out there where people are like, hey, I have the cure for autism. And then it turns around to be something that's completely unproven, and someone in the past, people have died from these unproven treatments.
Right. And often it comes from a truly important desire and want. So you have this big establishing operation to help someone and do all the behaviors to help someone. And maybe you don't know. I mean, not everybody understands or knows the science of ABA. So when they hear, they want to believe something. And so in that moment, they may not be as skeptical as they should be. And people provide those, as you say, cures or treatments that are really unproven, really don't do anything, and at best don't do anything, at worst have truly negative outcomes for both your child or client or whoever, but also the science in general that gets named with it.
Yeah.
And so this is a very important, it gets me really upset to think about this and the effects of it, and why we need to be more skeptical. And that's to avoid these things.
Here's the thing with being skeptical. It means a couple things. Now, a lot of people have co-opted that term, and skepticism means, as I said earlier, you are questioning the veracity of claims that lack empirical evidence. If you have empirical evidence and you're like, oh, I don't believe that, and you call yourself a skeptic, no, you're not being a skeptic. You're being a contrarian, because there are a lot of, in ABA, we have evidence. Someone could say, well, I'm skeptical of ABA. It has these problems, and they could dismiss the evidence, but that's not what we mean. We mean asking questions, looking for things, like what is the evidence? So science is important in understanding evidence, because that's going to help you with being skeptical.
Well, you go back to the characteristics of applied behavior analysis. It goes with the characteristics of science. You're looking for replication.
Yeah.
Right? So when you say, I'm not going to believe your evidence, if there's a preponderance of evidence, sorry, you can't be contrarian. That's there. Now, if there's a teeny weeny bit of evidence, then skepticism may prove that we need to be more skeptical of that. So you can see how it's not just a fine cut and dry. Why we need it is very important, but when we should do that, it's not an easy kind of notion of where to be skeptical and when.
Yeah. If someone comes up to you and says, certainly there's a lot of treatments that are out there, but there's other just behaviors that can occur. Like if we pulled back out of ABA and says, and we talked about something like climate change, 90% of the people in the climate change community, they all agree that climate change is being affected by what we do. There's not even a question that it's occurring. There's not a question about, and you have all these people who are saying like, look, this is something we're doing. You could choose. Now, that doesn't mean every scientist agrees, because in every science you could find people go against what the evidence says. And it's the same thing in our field, where we have something called reinforcement, and that preponderance of evidence is something that you have to take with you when you evaluate other claims.
Right. And I think when you're just thinking generally about skeptical thinking, you're on the lookout for that. Your first instinct in almost every situation is to be conservative, step back, and begin to question. Now, you obviously don't need to run into someone in their face and start questioning everything about this, but before you speak, you begin to run through this process. Where we get in trouble is when we don't take that moment, and we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but when we don't stop and ask some questions, even silently at the private event level.
Yeah, absolutely. And building on that, you have to, if you're going to be a skeptic, you have to be open-minded. So if someone comes up to you and is like, hey, here's this thing, here's this intervention that I'm doing, and you're like, oh, that's just, malarkey. You have to ask questions. You have to embrace it and say, well, is it? Is that really something? And that's the thing. It's like both sides of it. Now, one of our heroes, Carl Sagan, he had a great saying, which is,
"No, you're going to steal it."
Well,
I was smiling because I was ready to go.
Oh, yeah. Am I stealing your thunder with the Sagan quote?
Yeah, you want to be open-minded, but you don't want to let your brain fall out.
Damn. We're on the same page.
Yeah, we're right there. We've done this before, so.
Exactly. And I love that quote because if all you do is you're like, oh, I'm not going to believe anything, that's the extreme. And that's really not what we mean by being a skeptical thinker and being part of using skepticism to your advantage.
I think that's actually really good, because there's that continuum, right? I'm going to believe everything and I'm going to believe nothing.
Yes.
And a skeptic moves sort of between those two, depending on what the topic is, depending on their understanding of the topic, depending on who's saying it, etc., etc. And it moves you along that continuum if you're going to follow or believe it versus you're going to reject and not believe it.
Yeah. Well, Doug, you bring us to our first secret word.
Uh-oh, secret word time.
Secret word is skeptics.
Okay, Rick, we've established what skeptical thinking is, but now how would you apply that in different situations? So what would we be doing when we are demonstrating skeptical thinking? And there are actually a bunch of questions, a bunch of tools that are available out there, and there'll be some sites in the resource notes so that you can follow up on this. Sagan has the baloney detection kit. Shermer has questions that you can ask. But this would basically, you'd be following some of these. So, for example, one question might be Occam's razor, right? If you hear something and there's a way easier explanation for it than what that person is sharing with you, that should send a little warning sign out there, right?
And when you say Occam's razor, a lot of people will also know this as the principle of parsimony. If you're looking at two competing explanations, and one is, I like to think of, you're walking across the street and you find a $5 bill. One of your ideas could be, well, a leprechaun put it there because they like me. And the other one could be it fell out of someone's pocket. Which one is more parsimonious? Which one is simpler? You go with the simpler one, and that is a good tool and a good way to apply skeptical thinking.
Right. So what's another question or way of thinking that would demonstrate someone looking at something skeptically?
You mean other questions beyond Occam's razor?
Yeah, just some other things that when you're applying skeptical thinking.
Well, a big one would be always looking for independent confirmation of whatever that thing is that you're interested in. Has someone actually done some kind of research on whatever that is? I'll throw something out at you, Doug. You've probably heard of healing crystals or healing gemstones. What would that mean in terms of what we're just talking about?
Well, now we get to apply some questions to this. So first thing, is there any data?
Yes.
Right? So you're asking, is there any evidence? And it's, as behavior analysts, we know the power of measuring behavior versus reports of behavior. So if you've got someone that says, it really worked for me, versus some other outcome, maybe medical or measured, those are two different things. I know that we don't like reports of student behavior. We want to see student behavior. So what's the evidence? Then who's telling me that? So if that person stands to make a considerable amount of money from their claim, that may be another warning sign. That in no way, shape, or form suggests that people don't make money off of very firm science or very firm evidence for claims. But that's another kind of check. So you begin to think, all right, where's the data? Who's telling me? Has anybody else found the same thing? We look at science, we look at the power of replication. If there's one study, no matter how wonderful that is, that's not acceptable. You need to see both systematic and direct replications within the literature, or at least have availability of that. Take it now. What are some other things that you could be asking about healing crystals to apply skeptical thinking?
One of my favorites is so-and-so is from Harvard or from Yale, and they said this, and you'll find these testimonials. That is 100% argument from authority. Just because someone is from a prestigious institution, that in no way confers anything on anything. Like we're both at very good institutions, and if we made some claim, just because we're professors at institutions of higher learning, that doesn't mean you should immediately believe, yes, we're experts in our field, but if I start talking about aromatherapy or these healing crystals, that's not only is that not my area of expertise, it's just me talking about it. What is that? What's special? What makes me special to tell you, hey, other than having a degree and being at this place, that you should believe exactly this thing.
Right. The one thing about science that you actually are held up higher for disproving something than you are for showing something works. Right. And one thing that you can kind of think about is if nobody has tried to do anything or tried to test that, again, that comes back to replication as well, but people should be trying to disprove those claims and having a hard time or can't disprove them, then that further establishes it towards a stronger side of evidence rather than a weaker side of evidence.
Yes.
There's just so many ways to apply skeptical thinking, and so many questions are out there. You have to begin by knowing those questions, and sometimes it may just be helpful to run through a checklist, right? Thinking about what to ask. Who's making the claim? Where's the claim from? Do other people's make the claim? There's so many.
the thing about being skeptical is if you start applying it, there might be some things that you believe in that you might not, you might have to overturn. Here's a real good one. Among some of the people in my friend group, I have some that believe in acupuncture. They're convinced that acupuncture is legit, that there's this scientific evidence behind it. But if you start asking these skeptical questions, what you see is the evidence for it. There's a lot of anecdotal evidence for it. And the studies that are done, the less rigorous they are, the more likely they are to show that, yes, acupuncture is this real thing. But the harder, the more controlled, like if you do these double-blind tests and people don't know what's happening and you actually run the numbers, you find out that there's no difference between a placebo group and a group that has it. And we have all this evidence, but yet you have to give that up. If you're a firm believer in acupuncture and you apply this skeptical thinking and you start looking at the evidence and you apply all these other questions, you're going to find that there's a lot of weak evidence, a lot of mysticism that surrounds it, but the scientific evidence doesn't point to its efficacy.
I think one of the next hardest, so yes, something you like or something you feel works, is one that a lot of people have trouble with when there's initial evidence and it becomes accepted, and then later on it's disproven. So there may be a whole generation that, so your parents, for example, really were being skeptical and were following the evidence, and the evidence changed. I always joke, like, which decade is it? Are eggs good for me or are they bad for me? Oh, wait, no, they're good for me again. So, the data, it's not that they're wavering, it's just different data shows different things. And then if you're really a skeptic, you're going to have to change if you ask those questions. And that becomes very hard. So it's not even the I like it. It's just I did the right thing earlier and now I have to do it again. But I got comfortable with it being on the strong evidence side, but now it's a much weaker thing.
Yeah. And when you apply skeptical thinking, this could put you in a position of being on an island. Just because you find, skeptical thinking is trying to get out what is the reality and the truth of things. There can be literally thousands or millions of people that believe something, but just because you have all these people that believe something doesn't mean it's true. Back in the day, we used to believe that witches flew around and cursed people. We still have people that believe in witches, but it was quite widespread. And those numbers did not mean that, yes, this is true. That's evidence because you have a lot of people believing something.
And what we see over time is the majority of people are moving more skeptical thinking about mysticism and witches, but new things take their place all the time, and it just shifts the nonstop seeing of UFOs, right? And believing, alien life is floating around right outside of our stratosphere. So that replaced, we kind of joke, oh, there's no such thing as witches, but wait a minute, we're failing to apply. So this is kind of meshing the first section of the dangers of not being a skeptical thinker, but how quickly when you begin to apply these, it becomes apparent when you start to ask these questions how it pushes you towards, if you answer them honestly and you're following through, you're pushing it towards either evidence or a lack of evidence.
Wait a minute. You mean there's no such thing as UFOs?
No, so technically, until it's been identified, it is a UFO.
That's true.
Why I added the aliens flying around. So an unidentified flying object, if I throw something and nobody knows what it's
a UFO.
I just made a UFO.
But it doesn't mean it's ET.
Right. Well, it could be. We never know.
It's a low probability, but you're right. It could be.
Right. But yes, so I was taking it to that. But yeah, those questions. And sometimes you said island, but it can be even more than that. It's uncomfortable to not follow what's going on around you. It's uncomfortable, whether it's your friend group or even your family group, that you've taken the data in a certain direction and they're pushing for something. And as behavior analysts, we talk about superstitious behavior, reinforcement of a behavior that actually became together, but it was correlated. It just wasn't really producing that, but then I start to do that. That's kind of how that process gets going. So stepping back, asking questions, and I think how to be a skeptic, first and foremost, is stop and think. And then what you do with that time is try to apply some of these questions, because if you answer too quickly, it's likely you're not displaying skepticism.
Well, then let's make our second secret word question.
Yes. Okay. So we've described basically how you display skeptical thinking. So a good question: how can someone become a skeptical thinker? And I really feel like, Rick, and you may think the same thing, but the world pushes you to not be a skeptical thinker. There's so many things working against you that you've got to know what it is and how to promote that, as well as what's going on in the other side, pushing you down that other path.
No, you're so right. Ever since, when we think about change of technology and society, we're living through an era where we are being bombarded by information. Facebook, TikTok, you pick your social media. People are out there making claims. You just open up your internet to do a search, and big social media is following you, and they're listening to you through your smart devices. And if you say things, they're going to feed you these things, and they have all these algorithms. And you're right, it's hard because there's just a barrage of information that we're being assaulted with. It feels like sometimes, and being able to be skeptical is really important. So there are ways to definitely protect yourself.
Right. And I think the first and foremost is probably learn more about the questions and the tools that you can use to be a skeptical thinker. And as we mentioned earlier, there'll be a few books, but you don't necessarily need to do those. You can read a variety of things. In fact, you can practice being skeptical about the questions that you're reading while you're going, to make sure that they are making sense across multiple planes. So I think reading is probably the first thing to do, and that includes audiobooks.
Yeah, that's right.
I don't want to just say you've got to look at a paper. You can read and exercise.
I'm going to name 3 books that I love. One is Sagan's Demon Haunted World. It's just a classic, and start there. I mean, there's just so many. I mean, it's not. It's a compilation of Sagan's writing, but it's fabulous. Number 2 is Nonsense on Stilts, Igliucci. Number 3 would be Michael Shermer's Why Do People Believe Weird Things? There are many other books out there, but those 3 are really good ones to start with.
I think not only that, there's a part of the book that has to do with skeptical thinking, but I think all 3 of those books have so much more to offer you sort of generally about thinking, about data, etc. So I think great recommendations, Rick. I second.
Thank you.
All right.
Your comment about not just reading books but going online would also be a really good. It's really good advice. If you go to YouTube or you listen to podcasts, there are some excellent thinkers out there, people from skeptical societies, and just listening to people that have been doing this for years. Everything that we've been talking about, we've been talking about thinking and reasoning. It's all verbal behavior. And you have these people from these, verbal behavior communities that have just been so well versed in all the things that we've been talking about. And like you and I are at a certain level, but there are people that that's what they do. That's their entire life.
Right.
And to listen to them, it's a joy if you can find the right person.
So, and you will know if you're getting a skeptic and just a straight contrarian,
right,
because they're applying these tools. It's a very open process. This is not hidden. And they take on different topics. So it's not just thinking about critical thinking, but they may be looking skeptically at some recent therapeutic intervention. So they're applying those skills and they talk about it. It's usually not done by themselves. They do it with other people. So yes, YouTube, you've got podcasts, but one way that you can combat or build skeptical thinking is hard. And that is removing yourself from some of these echo chambers, or understanding that you are immersed in an echo chamber. It's very easy. I don't go on Facebook, but if you go on Facebook, if you only get certain Instagram sent to you, if you only are dealing with certain people, you're hearing a message. And that message feels like it's coming from everyone. It feels like it's being supported by everyone. It feels like everyone agrees with the data. So you're actually trying to apply skeptical thinking in a room where it was never skeptical necessarily to begin with. So look for where you're at. And if you're stuck in one of those chambers, you have to ask questions outside of that chamber. I'm not saying leave, but that may not be the best place to ask questions of the group, because everyone else is already in that realm. So step outside your echo chamber. Begin to look at maybe a more peer-reviewed science. Look at what the rest of the world is talking about. So I think that's a hard one, but it's necessary to become a skeptical thinker.
I'm glad you brought it up, because it's so true. How many, if we our audience is listening to us right now, I want you to think about this. I'm breaking the fourth wall.
Uh-oh.
What is a conspiracy theory that you know of? Everybody knows about a conspiracy theory, and some people that fall into these conspiracy theories do exactly what you said. They go to these places and they listen to people that are going to reinforce what they're saying. We've all, like QAnon is a recent conspiracy theory, and it's a group of people that believe the world is being run by Satan-worshipping pedophiles. That's their belief. Like someone said, this mysterious Q, posted something on the internet, and everyone believes this. And this is what's most recent, but we could turn the clock back. Like if you remember the 90s, when we had there was I think it was a child, and there was the belief that there was all these Satan worshipers with running these preschools, and kids were being fed like this stuff. Even though we're experiencing it now, this isn't novel to where we are. It happens through time. And now it's just so easy to go online and to have 1,000 people telling you how smart you are and how great you are for saying these things that have no evidence in reality.
And this comes back, and I'm going to use this example we talked about earlier. Where do we need skeptical thinking? But parents, parents look for support. They want to help their children. They want to invest in the best things possible. And you can inadvertently get into groups online while you're looking for support, and you get sucked into these echo chambers. And you no longer are asking the bigger questions because they're supporting you. Everybody's doing it. It's so wonderful. The outcomes are amazing. Watch my video. And so this is how to do that is to get away from those echo chambers. It's difficult because you get sucked into them quickly because of need, because you want help. So, try to learn your tools before you go. That way you can better evaluate those. So where else can we? Oh, one thing that you can do is talk to someone that's not on a podcast. That's not on, maybe you talk to them in person, or maybe you give them a call. You talk to someone who you feel approaches things skeptically, and have a discussion about what questions do they ask? How are they approaching things? What do they think about something? And what that does is that becomes a data point for you. And then you can go ask somebody else. And then, so you, again, we're not believing that person. We're practicing skepticism while learning to be a skeptic.
Yeah. So, as you said, having people in your life is very helpful. If you can't find someone in your life, and hopefully you can, something else that I would recommend is seeing people. I remember it was probably 4 or 5 years ago, Neil deGrasse Tyson came to Penn State, and I brought my daughter with me. And we loved listening to him. He was live. It was an absolutely packed group, and that impacted her. And, it was good for me to hear it too. So seeking out people in any way that you can is a very helpful way to become more skeptical.
So I think, who knows, maybe in a future episode at some point, maybe we'll tackle something and be some skeptic. I don't know. That sounds like it could be a fun little exercise.
I'd like to do that.
All right, well, you got the first two, so I'm going to take this one. This is word 3. And the final secret word is everything.
Excellent. Well, thank you for sharing that secret word. And Doug, if we have more time, I feel this is one of those topics that we could have an hour on each one of these. It's so important to so many things, and this was an absolutely delightful conversation, and I'm so glad you're back.
Well, I'm glad to be back. And to your point, from what I understand, I think we might be doing these next year. So maybe we could even do another generally about skepticism as well. It's kind of an exciting thing. I enjoy talking about it and could talk about it for another
agree.
Hour.
And
Half hour.
We do have an email, so if any of you out there want to ask us questions or talk about anything that we've said, hit us up on email. With that, I would like to thank you all for joining us on ABA On Call.
Thanks for watching this episode of ABA On Call. To get your CEU, follow the link and instructions below the video. You can enjoy the program again there, or you can go straight to the attendance verification quiz. Just enter the secret words and pay the CEU fee to generate your certificate.